I work at CompuGroup Medical on an application called Take Care, which is a large electronic medical record system. So it handles all patient-related documentation at hospitals and primary care centers, private GPs, that sort of thing. So appointments, case notes, medication, lab supplies, all of the medically related documentation. And our customers are typically very large regions or county councils in Sweden. We have a tiny installation in Malaysia as well, but otherwise we're in Sweden. So it's an enterprise product, it's a larger product, and we have large enterprise customers, which have many architects on staff and non-functioning IT departments. And this, in Croatia, this means that web services in our world means SOAP. So no web sockets, very little REST-based services, but SOAP. And SOAP is the simple object access protocol, and here anyone who has used SOAP, you can laugh now at the simple prefix, because it's a humongously complicated and complex protocol. The basic idea is simple. It's to perform, actually it's not that simple, it's to enable sort of object remoting via XML over some transport, which of course is abstracted, but in practice it's always HTTP. So you send and receive XML messages, and the XML messages are very long and verbose and complicated. And there's a very complicated type system for all this, which is XML schema. And XML schema was designed to support both the object remoting of SOAP and the requirement of putting HTML into XML in the form of XHTML, which was sort of a failed standard which no one uses anymore. So all of this means lots and lots of complexity, both in the type system and in the whole idea of object remoting, where you're supposed to be able to, for example, trigger an exception on the server, which gets serialized into an XML message, which is then supposed to trigger an exception in your code, and you're supposed to have methods and objects, all this sort of stuff. But this was the requirement to interoperate. So our first idea was, let's just ignore all this complexity, and we'll use the wonderful tool Dialog provides to integrate with .NET. So, and we use, at the HTTP front end, we use IIS. So we built an integration server on Windows, which used IIS to expose an HTTP interface and calls, and we use the .NET framework to do all the SOAP stuff. And this worked pretty well. We've had some performance issues with the Dialog running under IIS, where performance would go down after a while, after we had served a certain amount of requests. We had to recycle the IIS application pool and stuff like that. But overall, it worked reasonably well. But our main server is cross-platform, and our biggest customer runs it on AIX. So they had to have a separate server, and this caused some issues. Latency is worse because you have to talk to an additional server every time you do something related to web services, and it's more complicated because you have flow between different servers and different logs, and it's harder to debug. So when the time came to do SOAP integration in one of the core components of the main server, which is the interaction with the central census registry. So when you enter a search for a patient and the patient has visited the hospital before, it fetches the name and address and that sort of stuff from a central census. And that is very tight here. So we figured we'll try doing something else and doing this via the .NET server. And then the second attempt sort of to do SOAP was to write a program in C++, which used some C++ library I can't remember the name of because it's in my files, which I don't have. And then just shell out that program, have that make the call, return the response, everything simple, and that worked pretty well for a while. It was C++, so it took longer to write, it was more complicated, but we wrote it as a sort of generic component that could make calls to any SOAP interface, so that was fine. And then one of our customers upgraded sort of something, and then because SOAP is so huge and so complicated, it no longer worked. so the .NET stuff always worked, at least if everyone else used .NET, which they mostly do in the enterprise, so that was sort of good. But then someone used Java, and then that sort of didn't really work. But okay, so the C++ solution then didn't work, and we figured, what do we do now? Okay, but maybe we can reuse the .NET stuff, but we skip IIS and all of that stuff. So we just call a .NET program on the main server, which for this particular customer who upgraded their infrastructure and then couldn't use their own solutions, happened to use Windows. So we'll try just shelling out to a .NET program instead. We should probably just be able to write a PowerShell script to do this. And we did, and PowerShell is sort of horrible to write in, but it sort of worked. But that wasn't cross-platform. So then when the next customer came with different requirements and different interoperability requirements, of course, because it's SOAP, so it never works between two, unless everyone writes all the endpoints by themselves. It almost never works. We tried cross-platform solutions, so there was a pretty mature SOAP library for Python, and we know Python, and we have a couple of administration scripts written in Python, so we figured why not we'll hack together Python scripts. And there's a SOAP library called Soapy for Python, so use that. And that worked for a while until that particular backend upgraded their SOAP infrastructure, and then it stopped working. Some obscure error related to OpenSSL and the order of ciphers, suits, and that sort of stuff. So finally we said we give up with SOAP. Let's just treat SOAP like a really, really horrible REST service. So you connect over HTTP and you send some huge blob of XML, and you get a huge blob of XML back. And we just handle it case by case. We give up on SOAP. So the latest attempt is to use libcurl, which is an external HTTP service to send and receive request reply HTTP. And then we have just a huge template with pre-generated SOAP XML nonsense, which we fill in with the data in a couple of places. And then we send that. And the advantage of that is that curl is a very compatible library, so we don't have much HTTP-related issues, which we've had in all of the other, either performance-related or compatibility-related. And we'll see how that goes. It will probably mean it'll break whenever they do an upgrade, but it does anyway. So then we can just change the template around a bit. And we also don't have to do this whole, if you've ever handled SOAP web searches, they publish something called a WSDL file, which is a type definition of what they accept, and you're supposed to compile that file, which is lots of XML, into a DLL, which you load, which then provides types for, and all this nonsense is completely necessary in a dynamically typed programming language anyway. So we can just skip that and go straight with it. So all of this story really is about the horrors of the simple object access protocol. I'm not sure what the morale is, what you should take home from this, other than that SOAP is very bad at interoperability and very complex. And I hope in the future that will lean more services will be exposed in a more simple way via HTTP, which seems to be which generally works, unlike SOAP. And as long as you get, and most SOAP web services we consume bizarrely anyway don't use any of these objects and remote exceptions and having methods. They just return an XML string anyway. So all of this machinery is completely for naught. It just gets in the way of compatibility. So we'll keep the original solution, .NET solution via IIS, that's still present and still working. So that will be our main way of accepting SOAP connections from other services. And then we can tell our enterprise customers that just, we use .NET, you love Microsoft, make it work with .NET, and we'll be fine. And they'll accept that. And tell systems to use some other incompatible way of talking SOAP to just man up and rewrite it in .NET. So that will be fine. And then the current plan is to to expose more of our services more directly to avoid the horrors of SOAP and just use HTTP and JSON. So we'll do a really simple RPC interface over HTTP and JSON. And then that is in progress currently, and then we can build new clients and various integrations on top of this. And the enterprise, and for example, there are national standards in Sweden who dictate that you should use SOAP for various services and contracts, and we can expose those via the .NET stuff we already have, and then we can do our own same API based on HTTP. And that's using Conga, and I'm not actually sure what HTTP library they're on. I think they're using some very, very simple thing they hacked up themselves. But we'll see. Maybe we can use Rumba for that, or maybe we can offload most of the HTTP stuff to something external and just do the application logic in Dialog. And hopefully we can also, for calling out to web services IDs, we hope that we can use libcurl for that and just delete all the other weird approaches we have, like the C++ binary and the PowerShell script, Python script, and all the other various ways. So other than some slight performance issues, I'd say exposing via .NET and IIS is fine. It's worked pretty well. I think the issue with the threads accumulating and getting slow is solved now. I'm not sure. I'm not.
So was that an issue in .NET or in?
It was an issue in some sort of way with how our IIS interacted with Dialog. So we would start threads, and then they wouldn't be killed properly. So eventually, the Dialog interpreter would run slower and slower and slower until you did an IIS recycle, which basically tears down some shared structures and restarts them again. I think that's all done now.
Yeah, I think.
But that was one hair issue we had. And of course, there are always some type-related. We've had some type-related issues where how this expects an 64-bit int, and then we install a new version of Dialog, and the automatic type promotion doesn't recognize that it should be. We had some sort of issues, but not that bad. And hopefully, we can treat SOAP like when we do external calls, like just a really horrible HTTP service that's hugely complicated. Yeah.
Do you have any say in, I mean, the SOAP endpoints that you're talking about, do you have any influence in getting them changed?
In theory, but not in practice. It's hard. Most of the national standards in Sweden, they invite our customers to talk about how to expose a service or how to define a service. And sometimes we can talk to our customers and get input in that way, but it's very hard. The suppliers really aren't involved, which is strange, but that's the way it is. And we focus not on SOAP, but on changing that, because that's hard, but then we focus on the semantics of the service and what should the informatics content be, what sort of information should flow, and how should that be typed, and that sort of thing, because that's harder to solve anyway than the technical integration. So I'm not really sure, but how many people use SOAP web services? Is that integrated? Yeah. And what do you use? .NET or some other? What do you use?
The one place that we do use it, we are not allowed to use .NET.
Okay.
So we flirted a bit with source and then wrote a simple, similar to what you said. Yeah. Still an APL, but build up the XML, run it through validations in development, and then just fingers crossed it'll run in production, sort of thing.
Anyone else? Does anyone use source or?
We adapted the file. So
okay, yeah. So
there is only the file.
Yeah, that's all I had really. Tale of the many horrors of SOAP compatibility. But I'm very curious into what others have used and what you have what your experiences are. How the source, your hacked version of source, how does that work well? Do you have compatibility or interoperability issues with other stacks? Or, works fine.
It's commercially working for at least a year.
The issues we had was the schemas you referred to. The service provider didn't really bother to notify of any changes to the schema, and they have this very advanced delivery mechanism with 5 different phases, where each phase was on a separate server with a separate schema, and nobody knew when anything got propagated. So in trying to run something like that, it's very difficult to keep up and keep in line with what's actually on there. And what you said is what we've noticed as well, that in theory, it's self-defining and it's easy. All you need to do is compile this into a DLL. But you're not notified of a change.
No, exactly, yeah. That's our problem as well, that the WSDL files are updated, but they don't notify any of the systems integrated, and of course, it all falls down. Yeah, and also the fact that there is this hugely complicated type system enabling you to send type data, but everyone, well, I think virtually every service we talk to just sends text now. So it's all
for naught.
Well, yeah, it's all points.
Right.
But source is interesting. We haven't tried that, so maybe that would be better if we'd done source on the server. But then we'd have to do Kong externally, and we've had sort of we didn't want to complicate the server code by doing bidirectional communication from the same process, because we had a bunch of issues with sockets going strange. And now sort of we've finally reached a level where it's sort of smooth sailing. But this has been, I think, the first SOAP interface we did was almost 10 years ago. So this wasn't over the course of a year. We tried all of these different things, but very, very gradually.
Right. So you're hoping for, well, let me see if I can summarize. SOAP is slippery, should be put to rest.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, yes. But it won't go away. And I think our plan is, like yours, is to, if we need cross-platform, just treat it like a really horrible HTTP-based service, and it will break anyway whenever someone does an upgrade. So there's no real loss. And for the exposing stuff, we'll stick to .NET for that. We could try source, but then we'd have a whole shaking out period where we find issues or performance bugs, and it'll take a couple of years before it's smooth sailing. So I'm not sure it's worth it just to change, because it works reasonably well on .NET. So
Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions? All right.
All right. Thank you.